In her biography, my guest today writes, it was marrying the wrong man at 23 which changed the course of her life. Behind her now ex-husband's radiant smile was a deceptive, controlling, cocaine-addicted drug dealer. It put her life on edge and in fear. She found her strength, she found her resolve, and turned her own life around. Bridgette Lewis is the remarkable young lady who is a writer of books to help empower others. From Pitfalls to Purpose and The Bounce Back, outlines 6 simple steps to rebuild the body, mind, and spirit. Not only is she a leading wellness writer, but Bridgette is a speaker, coach, and the founder of Coffee Talk Jazz Radio in LA, launched some 16 years ago with a combined audience of 4.2 million listeners and 156,000 subscribers to its sister company, Coffee Talk Magazine. She says, my life is living proof it's possible to recover from a family crisis, a failed marriage, and homelessness. Bridgette, welcome. I find your story remarkable. Remarkable since you're so open about your personal challenges and how they've motivated you. It appears that music is very much your balm, soothes you. When did you realize that you had to be so open about your own situation in order to heal?
Mm. I find myself already being very emotional. Just as you were reading and doing my introduction, I'm thinking I'd like to know who that woman is. And to hear all of that, it was such a weighty, heavy situation. And I just knew in order to survive, I need to figure out what those tools or what techniques I would need to use in order to overcome everything that I was going to walk through. But music for me has always been like that anchor, um, that solace. It was always a thing that kept me centered. There was always the melodies. There was always the lyrics to a song that would just keep me going when I was ready to crumble, when I was ready to fall apart. But I knew that there was more for me, and so by listening to the lyrics and those melodies, they helped me. They kept me grounded.
What's your earliest recollection of encountering music? Do you recall?
Oh my goodness. As a little girl, I was probably about 5 years old, coming from a musical family. My uncle sung, my mother had a really beautiful voice, and music was always around the house. It was gospel music, it was R&B, it was soul, it was classic, and then I found myself just singing along with the melody. So I had to be about 5 years old.
What's your earliest recollection of hearing an artist and a record? What was it, do you think?
Oh, my earliest recollection. I think about the old school, the bygone era when music was really music, when writers could really write and singers could really sing before the drum programming and all the synth machines and all that kind of stuff. And you would hear singers like Otis Redding, you would hear singers like Aretha Franklin, you would hear Mattie Moss Clark, the great gospel, singers. So James Cleveland. So, my life in music has really been rooted in gospel because words have power. And so I would listen to those words and I would take them in, and those words would give me strength. That's why music is so important to me.
Give us an insight into what your early life was like. You recall hearing music in the house. Tell us about your family, your siblings. And what were you like? Where are you in the pecking order?
That just makes me giggle because there are two girls. I'm the youngest of the two daughters, and I always felt like the odd man out because I'm left-handed, right? So I knew there was something that was very different about me, and that was always kind of like pointed out. But to me, being left-handed was kind of like my superpower, if you will, right? But growing up, I was the one who was very gregarious, the one who was very loud, the one who was really funny, the one who said whatever was on her mind. My sister, on the other hand, was very more introverted, very quiet, very observant. Like, I don't really know who you are. Like, I don't really trust you. I really need to kind of warm up to you because you're up to something. That's just her. That's just her personality. And me, on the other hand, I was like, um, anyone could come to the house. I would welcome them in because I was very trusting as a little kid. I was very trusting, which I should not have been, but I was.
The young man with whom you married, what was the attraction there?
Oh my goodness. There was someone, his name was Daniel. And the thing that attracted me to him was he dressed impeccably. He smelled well. He looked the part. He was 8 years my senior. And I always believed everything that my mother said. And she says, oh, he's a good man. He can provide for you, he can take care of you. And I just remember saying to her, I really want to finish school, Mom. And she says, oh, but I think he's the one. And of course, we listen to our mothers because mama knows best, right? So I listened to my mom, and he talked fast. He was from Chicago. Um, he was slick, right? But I didn't know what slick was. I mean, I was a woman. I was 23 years old. Like, what do you know about marriage at 23 years old? You don't even know who you are as a person. You know what I mean? And so he was very charismatic, and so I was very drawn to him because of his charisma. And he used that to his advantage, not just with me, but to get what he wanted from other people.
What designs had you on your life and career? Where were
Uh,
you hoping to go?
yeah, wow. In my mind, I never thought that I would have children. That was not on the radar. And my goal was to get my master's degree in communications. I wanted to become a journalist. Like, I would see these beautiful women on television and the news. I'm like, I want to do that because being behind the microphone was my happy place. And I remember my earliest recollection of that was being in church, and the Sunday school teacher told my mom, she says, Bridgette needs to memorize her Easter speech. And it was something about me taking that microphone in my hand, and it just felt like a natural extension. And she says, you know, we want her to, you know, she can put it on an index card and read it. And mom says, no, you're going to need to memorize that. So I was so proud to stand in front of the church, you know, and spout out my Easter speech. I knew it line by line and all the intonations and everything, you know. And everyone else had their little index card. They were reading. And yeah, so the microphone and we just became one. So yeah.
Let's get on to your first track, if I may. You've chosen an interesting selection. Some of these I'm not familiar with, so thank you for introducing me to something that's very different. The first one is I Know the Plans, Martha Munizzi.
Because my life was a living hell. Being married to Daniel was an absolute nightmare. And I said, there has got to be more to this life than this, because what I saw on the outside did not match the inside. And my life really was in peril. My life really was in danger. And the thing that I remember, just to give you a little bit of context, is um, after we got married, he moved me away. He pretty much he isolated me. So he moved me away from family, moved me away from friends. I was introduced to all of his friends who were much older, and I just remember um, being introduced to his friends, and I was kind of like within earshot, but he didn't see me. And I remember them saying, well, they called him Danny. That was his street name. He says, Danny, does she know? Have you told her? And I'm thinking, well, maybe he has some type of illness or something that, as the wife, that I should know about. And so I remember his sister coming to me and sharing some details about his past prior to getting married, just to give you the context. And so she says to me, She says, my brother, she says, has had a drug problem. Now, the time that we were dating, I had never seen any type of drug paraphernalia. I didn't even know anyone who was even involved in drugs at all. And so the facade and the way that he covered everything, I mean, it was just beautifully covered up. He did all of his dirt when I wasn't around. Oh yes, it was quite special. And so I just remember meeting all of his friends and going to these big, beautiful, elaborate homes. Here I am, 23. He's 8 years, my senior, and driving to these long driveways, the type of homes that you would see the stars of today, behind the iron gates, these very long driveways, and you walk in these beautiful hardwood floors and these high vaulted ceiling. I mean, just really palatial. I'm thinking, what would those people have to do with him? He's a regular guy, but he worked under the guise. He worked in the travel industry. He was a high profile executive in the travel industry. And so that really was his cover. So he really lived a dual life, right? Something that I didn't even know about until I married him. And that's when all the hell broke loose. And I just remember this song that my mom used to play says, "For I know the plans I have for you." And it talks about when you can't see what tomorrow holds and yesterday is through. For remember, I know the plans I have for you. And so I knew that God had other plans for me. And I'm like, this is not God's best plan for my life. And I've got to figure out a way to get out of this. And I knew I was in trouble probably about 2 or 3 months after we got married, because this was a time where you send out all the thank you cards. And one of the things that my mother always taught us is, as little girls, is it's always nice to be nice. And you have to say thank you because people don't have to do things for you, right? So most of the people that came to the wedding, they gave us beautiful gifts and all of this cash and all of this money. And so one of the things I remember doing was sitting down with the wedding registry and checking off who gave what gift. And let me write out the check and let me write out the thank you card for the check that they had given. But I'm writing out the thank you note, but I don't see the checks. And so then finally, some of my mom's friends were saying, "Well, I didn't get a thank you note from Bridgette because we gave her $300 or whatever it was." So I later found out that my ex-husband had taken all of the money and he was using it for drugs and doing. I mean, he was so deep in debt, and he was so deep in debt. Um, he became his own best customer, right? He became his own best customer. And one of the things that I remember, he said, "I want to do a little something different with you. And why don't we get on the bus and go to the mall?" It didn't even make sense in my mind. I'm like, "What do you mean get on the bus and go to the mall? Like we have a car, right? We had a condo, we have a car." So I'm like, I'm going along with this thing, right? And so we get on the bus, we go to Century City, and that was back in the day when they have the stores, I Magnums and J Magnums, those kinds of stores. And I remember he says, "We have to put on our good clothes." He was always about the show. I'm like, I'm a girl from the Texas countryside. Like, what do you mean by the good clothes? So it's like you have to wear a dress, but that was that whole controlling, molding, and shaping thing, right? So we get in the store and he says, "Oh, honey, go over there because I'm gonna go buy this and this and this." And I remember saying, I said, "I don't want anything. I don't need anything." And I'm trying to figure out why are we even in the store? Little did I know, he was in the store and he was stealing. He was stealing. And what he didn't know is that there were 2 or 3 security cards and there were cameras that were all around the store up in the top in the air conditions. Of course, you can't see them, as a customer walking around the store. So all of a sudden he was like, "Okay, I'm ready to go," up to about 45 minutes, right? So he's rushing me. He's like, "Come on, honey, come on, come on." And so he goes up to the counter, he buys one little trinket or whatever it was, and he says, "Let's go this." I'm like, "No, no, no, I want to go this way." So he's rushing me down the escalator, and I'm just thinking in my mind, something is off. A woman's intuition is always right, right? I didn't listen to my intuition at the onset of this marriage. So we're going down this escalator. And the next thing I know, there's these two huge, massive security guards that are running up the other way. And I'm what is happening? What is going on? I was like, I was stunned. This is, ma'am, it's not you. It's not you. We want him. And this is, no, he's stealing. I'm thinking, what are you talking about? Because I didn't see him steal anything, right? So they rush us back into the store. They take him back into the back room and they're questioning him. He was like, no, I didn't steal anything. I didn't steal anything. And I'm back there with him and they're pulling stuff out of his back. They roll up his pants. They're pulling stuff out of his pants. And I'm like, I'm dumbfounded. They made him take off his shoes. He had $1,500 rolled up in his sock. He says, I didn't know. I'll pay for it, right? And so then the craziest thing happened, Diane. He goes into some type of convulsion. This is a man I had dated 16 months. I'm just, all this is happening to me at one time. Like, I just married this man. He moves me away from my family. He's he's a kleptomaniac. He's one of the biggest drug dealers in LA. And my life is like hell. Like, I've got to get out of this. And so he's trying to talk his way out of this situation. And so he says to them, he says to them, I have a heart condition. I have a heart condition. He goes into this whole entire act. And I am just hysterical. Can you imagine? I'm 23. And then the security officer said, we're going to call the police. You're going to be arrested for theft. And I remember just crying uncontrollably. And he's looking at me, he's motioning me, and I'm trying to figure out like what he's saying. And they're telling me, says, don't talk to her, right? And he was like, but that's my wife. That's my wife. So he's trying to motion me to tell me to move out of the way because he's getting ready to make a mad break. He's getting ready to do a mad dash. That's when it just got crazy. I thought they were really going to hurt him severely. And I just remember one of the security officers just sitting on him. He says, this is it. We're just done. At that point, they handcuffed him. And then he goes into this other convulsion thing. And he says, I've got nitroglycerin in my pocket. I've got nitroglycerin. Honey, get my nitroglycerin. They go, we don't care what you have in your pocket. And he just begins to sweat just profusely. And I am just hysterical. I'm thinking this man's getting ready to die. And I'm like, I've got to get out of this. And I'm feeling so ashamed. I feel so embarrassed as if I had done something. And then the security officer said, you can write, since he's in a medical crisis, we're just going to go ahead and call the paramedics. And they did. And the paramedics came. And I'm thinking, I have no idea how to get home. Like, I know how to drive, but I have no idea how to get home. We go to the hospital. He's talking to me at the hospital and everything. And I'm thinking, what do I tell my mother? So 3 months after I get married, all of this craziness begins to happen. So he's incarcerated. He's still at the hospital. And then he says, honey, you're going to need to figure out a way to get home. And he has me to call Greg, one of the guys' homes that I went to. It was something really eerie about Greg, something really eerie about going to his house, something my woman's intuition, I was like, something just doesn't feel quite right. And I'm not calling him. I'm just not going to do it. And so I said, I got to figure out how to get home. And in my head, I knew it was the Holy Spirit. He said, just call Yellow Cab, just call a taxi. I called the taxi. They come and pick me up. And of course, I had this big wad of cash, and then I remember getting back to the condo and it was dark. And I remember just laying on the floor and I was just balled up and I was just crying uncontrollably. And I'm thinking, what am I going to tell my mom? And I'm trying to craft a story to tell her because she knows me as her daughter. I'm very open. And I called her and she could tell by the tone of my voice that something was wrong. And she said, Bridgette, what's going on? Not what's wrong, what's going on? And I'm trying to come up with a story. And she says, no, that's not the story. What's going on? And I'm still trying to come up with a story. And so she says, I'll wait. Because that's how my mother knew me. And then I told her and I said, he got sick in the store. They said he stole something. I didn't see him steal it, but they found it. And then she asked me, she says, where are you? And I said, I'm home. And I just remember being in this beautiful, gorgeous condo, married to a person that I love. And I just began to question everything about me. Like, what's wrong with me that I ended up attracting the crazy? And that's when everything just kind of snowballed. So,
It was interesting to hear your mother validate him. 3 months after you're married and all this is going on, and this is my interpretation that this is the first major evidence that this guy's not right for you.
right.
How did you feel about your mother, even though you called her? How did you feel about what your mother said by validating him before you got married?
I was very angry. I was very angry because I'm like, okay, mom, but you're supposed to protect me and mommy knows best. And you didn't pick well for me. But here's the thing that I didn't say is 6 weeks before we got married, I called the wedding off, called it off. I said, no, I called it off. As soon as the sister told me he had a drug problem, just in my gut, I just wasn't settled. I'm like, I'm not doing it. And he's trying to talk to me. He was like, no, she's really jealous. And she's never really wanted me to be happy. And you just can't believe her. And who are you going to believe? Me as your fiance or her? You don't really know her. And I'm thinking, well, that is his sister. Maybe she could be jealous. So again, he's trying to twist, but that's what narcissists do. They try and twist and flip everything. And so um, my gut's never wrong. And so I called the wedding off. I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm like, no. Invitations had gone out, the gifts, everything just began to pour in at my mom's house. And so my mother is talking to me and she was like, it's going to be okay. And I said, no, it's not, mom. No, it's, I was like, no, I'm not ready to get married. I want to go to school. I want to get my master's. I want to finish school. So my mother talks me to proceeding with the wedding. So the day of the wedding, it was the first time I'd ever met his mother. And it was so funny because his mother and my mother looked like they could have been sisters. His mother was just taller. She's like, because they a very tall family. She's like 6 feet, and my mom's like 5'4", right? And they same color hair. It was just the funniest thing. And I'm thinking that couldn't possibly be his mom. But I remember they played this song called it was the Bridal March. It was Jesus, Joy of Man's Desiring. And my uncle was the wedding coordinator. And all the bridesmaids put in. People there said, hey, Miss Bridgette, hey, there are so many people out there. The church is packed. They're standing room only. They can't wait to see you. So then my uncle is pointing and they roll out the runner, and then the flower girl goes out and she drops all the little rose petals and everything. And he's pointing and telling me he's pointing me to tell me to get in my place. And I just stood there. And the song is playing. Jesus Joy's Man's that song is playing. I'm not moving. The door's open. I see him down there with the pastor and my father. I'm not moving. I'm sorry, no, my father was on the inside. My father was on the inside of the door. I see my father. My feet are not moving. And I'm doing I just remember this like this was yesterday. My son will be 39 this year. That was like 41 years ago. And I just remember just shaking my head like no, like something like no. Because in my mind, I'm still hearing, does she know? Have you told her? Does she know? That's still going off in my head. And so they closed the doors of the church. And my uncle was saying, it's just nerves. It's just the jitters. I'm like, no. But I'm 23, but these are people that I love. These are people that I trust, but they're only seeing the outward person, right? Not the cuckoo crazy that I was going to encounter later. So about 15 minutes later, they opened the doors again. And I remember almost like digging my heels, like like literally digging, and my father was on my arm, and I remember like the veil was going up, like I'm hyperventilating, literally walking down the aisle. I was just and in my mind, I'm like no, like no, like no. And I'm looking at all these people, and he's down there just he's just like with a Cheshire cat smile, like I snagged one, you know. I did not know the hell that I was going to go through, and that God was trying to save me. Yeah.
On to track 2, Whitney Houston. What a great track. I didn't know my own strength.
Yes. Oh my God. And so life for me for the next 2 years, between the drug deals looking for him, between all the phone calls, between him, the days when he was missing. Um, Remember, he ended up getting shot, but it was only a flesh wound. They came looking for him, and I'm thinking, okay, like, but wait. So they called him by his street name, and they were saying, okay, he has 48 hours, and if he doesn't show up, then we're coming back for you. And to hear, yeah. So to hear that, and I told my mom, I said, Mommy, I said, I'm scared. I don't know who these people are. They're not fooling around. I don't know what's going on. And I remember calling his sister, and she says, "You've got to get out of there. You've got to get out of there." I packed up what I could. I left my house, and I was kind of basically like in hiding. And he still was able to convince my mom. I mean, she just had such a sweet spot for him. My God. And I said, Mommy, do not tell him where I am. Because I felt like at that point, like, okay, I'm in trouble because they want to hurt the next person that's closest to him, which would have been me at that point. And then I found out that I'm pregnant. Oh God. And I'm thinking, okay, I felt such embarrassment and such shame to find out that I'm married to a drug dealer who later becomes his best customer. And he really tried to pull me into that world, but I was just smart enough not even to fall into the trap. I remember he had been gone for 2 or 3 days on one of his drug stupors, and I didn't know if he was dead or alive. And for him, he just seemed to be okay with that. And I remember just laying in bed, and I was just literally like curled up, like balled up in bed. And I remember hearing the door crack downstairs, and our bedroom was upstairs. And I remember hearing his foot hit the bottom landing, and I'm hearing him like he was trudging up the steps. The steps, like his feet footsteps were so heavy. So I pretended to be asleep, and I was curled up, and I had the covers pulled over. And he was restless. He was antsy, and he opened up the closet door, and he just began going through my pockets in the closet, going through my purse, and just trying to find what he could. And then he put on his pajamas and slipped into bed, and I kind of like had one eye open, and he didn't know that I could see. He didn't know that I could see everything, and he tried to act as if he had been there like all night. And then remember about 20 minutes later, he poked me. He poked me. He poked me. Honey, I want to talk to you. Like it was nothing. Like you've been gone for 3 days, and honey, I want to talk to you. Like what in the world? Poke me, poke me, poke me. So I want to talk to you. He says, I've got a surprise for you. He knew that I loved surprises. And little did I know what laid wait downstairs in the bathroom. And so he says, got a surprise for you. I'm like, it's 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Like I'm tired. I'd been up 2 or 3 days, worried about him, thought he was dead, thought the drug people were after him. And he grabs my hand, and we go down to the front bathroom. He says, I want to show you something. And I said, what? So he opens up the cabinets, and he pulls out a cocaine crystal pipe. he pulls out, um, it had been there. It had been there all along, and so now I knew what the smell was. It was a smell of ether, and I was walking, and the house was just. He was so narcissistic that everything had to just be. He was very anal, very pristine. Everything just had to just be just so in order. And he pulls out a rag. He pulls out the ether, and then he had these rocks, which was it was rock cocaine or presto back in those days. It was back in the day they used to call it snow. They used to call it horse. They used to call it snow. They used to call it horse back in the day. And so he pulls his pipe out, and then he has this wooden spoon thingy, and he's beating it and everything so he could break it up, and he puts it in the pipe, and then the ether thing is there, and then the flames just shoot up. He says, "I want you to try it. Just try it." He says, "The best feeling in the world." I remember looking at him, and I remember looking in his eyes. And it was like I felt like I saw hell when I looked at his eyes. Like it was the most demonic thing that I had ever seen. It was frightening. Remember, his eyes rolled in the back of his head. The only thing I could see really at that point was the white of his eyes, and then smoke was coming out of everywhere. And now I knew why his lips were black, because he was always freebasing. He was always on the pipe. And I said, "You're crazy." I said, "I would never do that." He says, "But you can't tell anybody." And he says, "What goes in our house stays in our house." So it's like I couldn't tell anybody. And so I felt trapped. Here I was, this extroverted, gregarious girl, this big personality, and I really just began to shrink. He was very, very controlling. It was so difficult.
Around this time, though, of the Whitney track that you've chosen, you had other issues going on. Tell me
Oh God.
about your grandfather and what else was going on in your life at the time.
Oh my goodness. Sorry about that. Wow, my grandfather, that was one of the most beautiful, most memorable times um, in my life. I mean, growing up in the Texas countryside, it was just, I felt that was the first time I ever felt loved as a child. My grandfather was short in stature, but it was like when he spoke, it to me is like his voice, like it worked like thunder. It was like he was so authoritative, and whatever he said to do, I'm going to do that. And I had such reverential fear and respect, for him. But that was just the happiest time of my life when I just felt safe and warm and cared for, and that nothing could get next to me. Um, and I had a beautiful childhood that way. But as I began to transition, as I got older, my grandfather began to exhibit signs of he wasn't well. I later found out that he had congestive heart failure, and he had to have an aortic valve um, replaced. And so, coming from a close knit family, I remember how well he took care of my sister and I growing up. And so now, turnabout is fair play. It was my turn to now take care of him, because my grandmother, and they were much older in age, um, probably 80, 83, 84 at the time. And he could no longer care for my grandmother, Bertie. She was in a facility and she was ill. And so it was a lot of pressure and a lot of stress, for him. And so then he had to have his aortic valve replaced. And so I told my mom, I said, well, out of everybody in the family, I live closer to him. And so I said, I'll kind of watch after him. So I remember leasing a condo, a townhouse across the street from his condo. And it just really formed a different kind of a bond between the two of us. I mean, to say that I idolized him is probably really not the best word, but I had such great respect for him because I saw how he lived his life, and I saw how hard he worked, and I saw how hard he provided for my grandfather, and how he took care of my mother, and how he took care of my uncle growing up as a little kid. And so it was like, why wouldn't I want to take care of him? And it was challenging, but he fought until the very end. And I remember this actually, the very room that I'm in is the room where he passed. This is my favorite place in my whole entire house. When he got sick, and he called my sister, and he says, granddaughter, he says, I'm in trouble. I'm in a really hard place. I'm going to need some help. And that was hard for my grandfather to say that. And she says, we'll take care of you, Papa. We called him Papa. He says, Papa, we'll take care of you. We'll take care of you. And one of the joys and the things that I remember is this was during the time when Barack Obama was running for president. And he says, I always knew that we would have someone that would come out that would run for president. It wasn't like when Jesse Jackson ran. It wasn't like when Shirley Chisholm ran. It was just different. Barack Obama was a community organizer. He had that charisma. He was very different. And so one of the things and joys that I remember, even in Papa's illness, taking him to vote for Senator Barack Obama at the time. He didn't live to see him become president, but the fact that we were able to go and vote together, I mean, that was such a pivotal, seminal moment, in my mind of like we were rooting and we were praying and together, and Barack did become, he did get the nomination and he became the first, Black president of the United States. And I just remember crying and saying, I wish that Papa was here to see it. And Papa passed away. I'll never forget the day. It was October the 4th, 2008. And Barack Obama became president November the 4th, 2008. And then he was inaugurated, I believe it was in January of 2009. And I said, wow. And I said, Papa would have just loved to have seen our first Black president. So yeah, my grandfather was everything to me.
You have this interesting relationship with your mother. There's no doubt that you respect her and value her opinion. Yet you're going through this marriage and you're thinking, what the hell have I done? Then you find that you have to take care of her. How was that?
Oh my God. Ooh. I was really angry at my mother for making a life decision for me that altered my life for the rest of my life because I felt like I was supposed to go in a totally different direction. When my mom got sick, it's like that's the thing to do, as women, as a community, as a race of Black folks. We don't put our people in nursing facilities. It's just not what you do. You just love on them, you pull them close, and you take care of them. And so at the time when my mom got sick, I was 47 years old. And I felt like my life was perfect. I had saved my money. My credit was perfect. I was a perfect size 8. I was engaged to a man that I loved. And I remember talking with my mom the night before she got sick. She sounded a little tired, but outside of that, she was retired, but her and my sister were working together in my sister's bridal business. Mommy sounded a little tired. And so I said, Mommy, I'll talk to you tomorrow because we talk like all the time. So I get this frantic telephone call from my sister, and her voice was almost inaudible. And she's trying to tell me that something is going on with my mom. And so she said that she said, Mommy called me. And my sister is not one that gives into a lot of emotion. She's not a hysterical person, as I mentioned earlier in our conversation. And she was just trying to get it out. And I just remember saying, Sissy, take a breath. It's going to be okay. I got you. I was in a whole nother city. I'm an hour away. And I said, there's only 2 hospitals where they can take Mom. And she says, but Mommy was telling me that she had the worst headache that she'd ever had. And she was saying that she couldn't see. And then she said she couldn't breathe. And then my mother collapsed and my sister heard her hit the ground and she just lost it. And I'm still calm. And I said, okay. And I said, okay. I told her, I said, I'm going to call Papa because my grandfather was still alive. As my mother got sick, it was October 26, 2006. I'll never forget the day. 2 years before my grandfather passed away. And I said, it's going to be okay. And I remember calling my grandfather and I said, are you dressed? Something's going off, Mom. Can I come and get you? He said, yes. So I grabbed him and we're on the 710 freeway. And I'm telling you, it was the longest drive ever. And I just remember Diane just saying a prayer. And I said, God, can you just open up the freeway so I can get to my mom? And I just remember being in the carpool lane. And next thing I knew, I was literally like, I was at the exit. And I don't even know how I even knew to go to Daniel Freeman Hospital at the time, but that was where we went at the time. The hospital's not even there anymore. And I remember walking into, I'm getting really emotional about this part. I remember walking into ICU and seeing my mom laying on the gurney. And she was lifeless with no color. And my mind can't even process what I'm even looking at. And my sister was hysterical in the family room. And then the doctor comes out. His name is Dr. Yadigar. He says, we're not really quite sure what happened to your mom. He said, but we're going to find out. So we're going to run an MRI with your permission. I said, that's fine. And so he comes back and he holds up an x-ray. And my mother has a blood clot the size of a limb in her brain stem. She was bleeding out. And he says, most people don't survive what your mom, has gone through. And if she survives, we don't even really know, really what parts of the brain and the body will really be affected. And it's really like a crapshoot, basically. And I was so calm. And I remember looking at Dr. Yadigar and I said, Dr. Yadigar, and I said, no disrespect to you. And I said, but I'm a woman of great faith, and so is my mom. I said, but before you do anything, I said, may I pray over your hands? And he looked at me like, what? I said, yeah. And I said, may I pray over your hands? And he said, that's a very unusual request. And I said, she's a very unusual woman. And I said, and right now, I said, my mom's life is hanging in the balance. And I said, you're going to cut my mother's head open. I said, I have to ask the Holy Spirit to guide your hands because you're saying most people don't survive what she's been through because of where the bleed out is in her brain. And I remember as if this was yesterday, I remember putting his hands in my hands and he says, my hands are hot, my hands are warm. What's going on? And this is a shirt. He said, my hands are so hot, my hands are warm. I believe with every fiber of my being that it was the power of God as I was praying that God was touching my hands through his hand. And I knew at that moment that it was going to be okay. And then he says, we need someone to shave her head. And I remember Diane getting down in my mom's ear. And I remember saying to her that you shall live and not die, and you shall declare the works of the Lord. And I began to shave her head and just to pray over her and just to shave her head and just to speak life over her. And I said, I don't care what the statistics say. I don't care what the doctors say. And I remember another friend of hers who's now gone on, Pastor Janet, was there, and she was praying. We were shaving her head. And then I was signing the paperwork as we were going down the back way to the corridor to get into, surgery. I said, it's going to take about 22 hours and we just don't know anything. And so I went through all of that. And then we were all in the family room. The doctors came out and they said, we don't know who your mother is, but she fought on that table.
Track 3, Donnie McClurkin, we all fall down, but we get up.
Oh my God. I just remember, I knew she was going to come through it. I knew it. I knew she was going to come through. And then I remember just going into ICU and then seeing my mom, and she was unconscious. And I said, you know what, however she's still here, we still have her, even though she was in an unconscious state. And I just remember getting down her ear. And I said, Mommy, I said, I'm here. I said, Mommy, I said, I'm here. Kimberly, I'm so emotional. I said, Mom, I said, I'm here. And for 6 months, I drove to the hospital every single day. And I had music playing in my mom's ear because that was like one of her favorite things to do is to play music. And I felt like that music was like so healing for her. And the music was healing for me. And there was one song, which is still my favorite. It was called Perfect Moments by award-winning guitarist Peter White. And it was something about the way that the melodies of the chord progressions was something about the way that that song just hit my soul in such a way. And I said, I wonder what this man was going through when he wrote this song, because the song just lifted me to a different place. And I remember at this point, the doctor said, well, we've done all that we can do here. You can take her home now. And my mother came out of the coma after 6 months. And I'm like, what do we do with her? And at that point, I was working as an academic and admissions advisor at USC. And the man that I was engaged to, and he was like, I didn't sign up for this and I don't want to be a part of it. And I'm not going to take care of you. I'm not going to take care of your mom. So he walked. My job gave me a very difficult time. It was like, we really can't hold your job for you. And so I lost the job. I lost my home. I remember turning in my car. The man who said he was going to stick by my side, we weren't even married, but engaged. And now my mom is sick. And I felt like everything had just been I had just been stripped of just everything. And so my house went into foreclosure because the school did not want to pay me. They didn't want to pay me unemployment. They fought me on that. And at that point, I mean, the holy indignation rose up in me. I said, I'm gonna deal with y'all later. I'm gonna get back to this right now. I need to tend to my mom. And so the fighter in me, there's always been a fighter in me. Um, there's I'm a really resilient person. And so I just remember bringing my mom home, and I was sitting in my bedroom, and it's in the most audible voice. I was drinking a cup of coffee, and the Holy Spirit said, write. And I wrote the words coffee radio. And then I wrote coffee jazz radio. And then I wrote coffee talk. I was like, what? And then the words literally coffee talk jazz radio. It's literally how the podcast, how the show was born. And I reached out to Peter and I said, I wanted to interview him. I want to talk with you to find out what is it about this song. You were going through something. And that literally started Coffee Talk Jazz Radio. Peter White was my very first guest. And then the show just took off. And it didn't take off how podcasts are taking off now. It was an untapped market. I mean, nobody was doing what I was doing. So my background in marketing and promotions and my whole love of music and jazz and all of that all helped me. And then me with the gift of gab, that helped a lot. But at the same time, music was a thing that anchored me, because at this point I'm at home trying to take care of a mother who doesn't even know me, and she's fighting to help. So my mom is fighting me because her brain is not her brain anymore. Like, she sort of kind of looked like herself, but she wasn't. The parts they took out in her brain and how they tried to reconnect, like, she didn't know me. And so I have a mother who was disabled, who's disfigured. I have no job. The man walked away. I have no money. And I'm like, this is my life, God. Really? This this can't be my life. So I just felt like this was so difficult and so challenging for me. And I said, I know that there's a message. I know that there's a message somewhere in here. What is the lesson that I'm supposed to learn here? I learned it, and I learned it well. The tenacious spirit, the resiliency, to hope against hope, to believe when everyone that you thought would be there for you, when everyone literally walked away. And I had to figure out how to stabilize myself. I had to figure out, how do I get my balance back? How do I bounce back? How do I come back from all the hell? Because it was just one thing, one thing, one thing, one thing, one thing after the other. And I took care of my mother for 10 years, 10, as her full-time live-in caregiver. And, I said, I felt at that point, after I'd kind of settled into it, I felt like I was chosen. felt like I was chosen to serve her. I felt like I was chosen to love on her. And I remember when hospice would come to the house and they just said, "Your mom is a miracle." They go, "We have never seen anything like this before." They go, "What are you doing that other people aren't doing, that your mother has still survived?" And I remember taking my mom to acupressure, to acupuncture, special teas, taking special speech pathology classes because my mother, everything was just gone. I mean, I literally had to, um, my sister pureed all the food. I had to literally feed my mom because her vocals, everything was completely affected. She couldn't swallow. The left side was completely just gone. And I just remember this Bible verse as a little kid, and it says, "To honor thy father and mother, so your days will be long upon the earth." And honor means to serve. I said, "Okay, God, for however long she's going to be here, I'm going to serve my mom." And as I began to serve her and readjust my attitude and stop complaining and start praising, I just start thanking God that mommy can now move her fingers. I begin to thank God that now mommy can blink her eyes. I thank God that now mommy she can now cough. And because it was like when she would sneeze, it was like a cough sneeze, but it was just because all the vitals, everything wasn't reconnected. And then sure, she could do different things. And then I said, "Well, mommy, let me help you to walk." And she had a walker and a wheelchair. And I remember getting the belt and lifting her up and then putting my arm around her and then holding her. I'm like, "Okay, we're going to do one step at a time, one step at a time." And then my mom, she began to recognize me. Because her nickname for me was baby girl. She says, "I know you. You're my baby girl." Because before she didn't know me. She said, "I know you're my baby girl. You're my baby girl." I said, and we called her, my mother's name was Sarah, and we called her Miss Sarah so she could remember her name. My mother was an amazing, amazing woman. She was amazing. She was amazing.
This is where you've learnt from your mother. You touched
Yes.
on something in your notes to me. Tell me about your son. What was it like being a mother, having had this horrible marriage and relationship?
Oh, wow. I had so much fun with my son. My son's name is Daniel after his father, but I never called him that because I didn't never wanted him to be like his father. And so I called him by his middle name, which was Blake. And he only allows me to call him that. He would not allow anyone else to call him that. But we had fun together. He was a fun little kid. He loved me. He trusted me. We did everything together. He was almost like a little brother, but he had great respect for me. And of course, I had great respect for him, as his mother. And so I was just one of those kind of moms, like my mom was. I was very hands on. If it was baseball, if it was track, if it was debate team or whatever it was, I was always very, very hands on, with him. Um, I loved our relationship. And I remember as he began to get a little bit older and he really wanted his father around. And that was really a challenge for me because I really wanted to protect him from his father because I knew what type of liar he was. I knew he was narcissistic. I knew he was controlling. I knew he was still into the whole drug scene and that all of my ex spouses, everyone that he had been involved with, they had all been killed. They all died. They died early or they got killed. I mean, I could name them from Vernon to Bowie to Sarah to Charles to Donald. I mean, just gone. And he's still alive to this. He's still alive. And we'll get into that in a second. Um, but I remember my son saying, he says, "Mommy," he says, he says, "You're always here for me. You do so much for me. And I really want to know who dad is." And I never wanted to lie to my son. But I remember having a conversation with my grandfather, and I said, if he really wanted to go and live with his dad, I was like, absolutely, absolutely not. Like, no, because he was like he wasn't stable. He was always moving around. He was always ducking and dodging and hiding because he was always into some there was always an undercurrent of stuff that he was doing. So I was like, absolutely no, 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 no. My challenge was when my son turned 14. And he wasn't disrespectful, but he was pretty adamant about it. He says, Mommy, he says, I really want to get to know Daddy. He said, you're such a girly girl. And like, I really can't, like, I can't relate to you. As they say back in the day, like he starts smelling himself. It was like, I want like, I'm a dude. I'm a young man. Like, I really want to get to know my dad. So his dad lived out of state and his dad had been, I guess, clean and sober if you don't count all the drinking and stuff like that. If it wasn't cocaine, if it wasn't some lace something, he always had some type of substance in his body. So I'm like, absolutely, like no. I mean, my son pretty much begged me to go and live with his dad, and I was like, nope, like no. So the part for me that was a challenge was I did not want my son to resent me because he thought that I was keeping him away from his father, and so I was really challenged by that. So I remember sitting down and talking with my grandfather, and so he says, let him make the choice. So he says, let's have a meeting. So his father came to town and he was clean and sober. And I said, well, before I allow him to live with you, I said, I don't need to see where you live, what you're doing. He had gotten remarried. He didn't tell me that he and a wife had separated. He didn't tell me that. I didn't know that part, but I did see where he lived. He had a beautiful home. He was in Vegas. His life was pretty much stable, but he still had the same crazy, crazy personality. And so my grandfather says, he says, if you go and live with your dad, it's not just like, your mom's going to have to uproot you. You're going to be in a whole different state. And my son was in a blue ribbon school, and it was pretty tough to get him to that school. And so I was like, okay, well, my lease is going to be up from my place, pretty quickly. And so I'm like, okay, I really don't want you to go, but you've got to make the decision. But I never spoke ill against my ex-husband to his father. But I was also really just trying to really protect him because I knew his character. I did not want my son exposed to that. And my son begged and pleaded with me. And I said, Blake, and I said, no. I said, no. So finally, my grandfather said, it's his choice. You got to let him go. That was the hardest thing for me, to let my son go. It was the thing that I regret to this day. I regret it to this day. I do. Because he took my son through so much. It was almost like it was an extension of all the stuff that I had gone through. But again, it was his character. And he was verbally abusive. He was physically abusive. And I regret it. And one of the things that I remember is my son called me one day and he says, Mom, he says, we're in the dark. The lights are off. He says, I don't have any money to get to school. He says, and I'm hungry. And that crushed me. And back in those days, you could go to 7-Eleven and get a money order. And so I told them, I said, Blake, I said, I'm going to go to 7-Eleven. I'm going to get $100 money order. I said, I'm going to send it to you in the mail. I said, watch for the mail, watch for the mail. I said, don't tell your dad about the money. Because he had like this, it was like this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He could be the nicest person. It's like you see one person, you think it's him, and you see this whole other crazy person. And so then he got the money order and he cashed it. Man, and I think he was down to maybe $40. His dad found out, and his dad accused him of stealing the money out of his room, which he didn't. And so he beat him. And it tore me apart. And I'm like, I said, you got to come home. I got to get my son to come back. By this point, I couldn't get him back into school. And like, I can't leave him there. I can't. By this time, it's a whole year and a half. He's got to finish out the school year. And I said, just keep your cool. Talk to me every day. Do whatever your dad says. Like, don't make him mad. He didn't need to do anything to make him mad because his dad. And the thing I realized, like, oh, when you're narcissistic, when you're an abuser and that kind of stuff, like, you're mad at yourself and you're going to take it on the first thing that's there. And so, um, they have a very tempestuous relationship. He hates his father. Literally, he does. He hates his father, and his father he's still with that mouth. He's still abusive, and you aren't this and you aren't that, and that kind of thing. And so I said, here's the thing I want you to remember. I raised you one way. You learned a couple things from him, and I said you don't have to buy into the lies and the things that he said about you, which none are true. And I said, because you've got to remember, he has his own demons and his own illnesses and things like that that he is dealing with. And so, of course, he's going to try and project all of that, on you. And so, one of the things I said to my son is, I said, we need to get into therapy. I felt very responsible for letting him go. And so, my son ends up graduating from high school, and he ended up got a couple different scholarships. But his father talked him into, you don't need your education. You don't need that. You should just go to the service. He got a full ride scholarship to Brown. Brown, an Ivy League top rate school. Brown, oh my God. So, he talks him into going to the service. And I said, did your dad? He said, no, mommy, no, 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 no. His father had him so afraid of him. He was so afraid of his dad. He just didn't want to make him angry. And so then he goes away. He goes away to the service. He doesn't do well in the service. You can't have somebody that's screaming and hollering at you, especially you come out of an abusive environment, because you can't function. And so I remember getting a call. This is maybe 2.5, maybe 3 years, maybe 2.5 years in, and the master chief, I thought something had happened to him because he was overseas, and he says, I don't really know what's going on with your son. He says, but he's not doing well here. We're going to release him. And then my son came back. I remember my son came back home, and he came to live with me. And that's when we got into therapy. He just really began to share like everything that he went through, with his dad. And so, a lot of the songs that I selected, they have really kept me anchored and kept me really going, because I felt very much at fault. And it's a conversation I've had with my sister. And she says, but you got to remember that we all have the choice, and that he chose, even though you said like, no, I don't want you to go. Like he chose, he could have come home. But to me, the damage had already been done. It had been done. He blames me for that. Like right now, my son and I, we don't have a good relationship. I think the last time I talked to my son was, I think he called me on my birthday last year in September. Yeah, this is March. And I know he's well, because I know him, because he has my spirit. He has his dad's spirit, but he's also very prideful. He's also very, very prideful. So he's still very hurt from the things his father has done to him. And I says, you need to get into there, because I can love on him as much as I can love on him. But now, you're an adult, and that's going to translate into other relationships. And I've been very candid, very transparent. I've never hidden anything from my son, things that I walked through with his dad. Everything is in the book, from pitfalls to purpose. Yeah, the beautiful thing is that my son was at my book signing, and as I remember reading excerpts, from the book, and my son got very, very emotional, at the book signing, because I ended up going to jail behind something that my ex-husband had done. But of course, they realized it's like, she's not an accessory to this. Like, come on, have a conversation with this woman and look at her, and she doesn't know anything about all the crazy. But the one day that I was there and what I saw left an indelible mark. They realized it was like, we have the wrong person. Um, she's not some ringleader. She's not some mastermind. I don't even know how to. I don't even know how to roll a joint. I mean, come on. I don't even smoke. I mean, come on. Yeah. So.
I was skipping a track. Excuse me. I want to swap the Donnie Clurkin for the Pete White track. What was the title of that one that launched Coffee Talk Jazz Radio?
Perfect Moments.
Perfect Moment, right? Because you didn't talk about the We All Fall Down, but We Get Up. You spoke more about Peter White track. Perfect PRC moment.
That is okay, but I do want to say, when I say we all fall down, when I thought about my son falling down, when I thought about me falling down, that was why I selected the track, because as a result of everything that my son saw his father go through, the abuses and the name calling and the verbal and the physical and all of that was really internalized. And my son ended up he began to keep really bad company, and really began to make some really wrong, really bad decisions. And it was so dumb. It ended up landing him in prison, not jail, but prison. And he was in and out. He was in and out of prison, at least like 5 or 6 years, violating the probation, stuff like that. And then I'm just thinking, how could this have possibly happened under my watch? And it was something that made me cry, and that has made me cry, because my sister and I, she said, you can only be responsible for everything that you poured into him, and things that you didn't abuse him. You never assaulted him. You were always loving and kind and pulled him close. Remember, he made the decision to live with his dad. He was the one who made all of the choices. You know what I mean? But when you're being programmed like that by that kind of a person, you know what I mean, then you tend to believe your parents. You just
You
tend
did
to.
your mother.
Yeah.
But it's a learning curve. It's not a criticism.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I just still believe that I still believe there's so much good. I believe that there's still so much good in my son, and he's not in prison now, and he's married, and I have a beautiful granddaughter. But we just don't have a relationship, because he's angry with me. And I said, in time, I said I will give him whatever time. And sometimes it's, he'll be cordial, but it's very surface. It's very, very surface. Like, if someone asked me what he was into, where he worked, where he lived, what he's doing, I couldn't tell you, because I don't know. I have no idea.
We Gonna Be Alright, Tye Tribbett. You chose this track for what purpose?
The reason that I chose that track was because I know that through everything that I walk through, I'm still standing. I don't look like what I've been through. I'm 63 years old, and I don't look like the hell. I don't look like the hell that I have walked through. Me taking care of my mother for 10 years, me being married to a narcissistic drug dealer, for a decade, me losing, everything, me taking care of my mom. And so when I said, we fall down, we get up, or It's Gonna Be All Right by Tye Tribbett, I mean, just listening to, again, the lyrics, I knew that I was going to be okay. And I said, okay, I can either wallow and everything that I walk through, or I can share my testimony, and I can share with other women how you can bounce back. And I said, that happened, that happened to me. I said, but I can take those lessons and I can impart wisdom, and I can share with other women, this is how you come out of this situation. These are the red flags you need to look for when you're dating. These are the red flags that you look for in a marriage situation. Just trust your intuition. Trust your gut, because it's always, your gut is never going to lead you astray. Men have instinct, women have intuition. It never steers us wrong. Never.
For your penultimate track, you've chosen Fantasia's Summertime. You say this is the best time of your life. Give me an insight into that bucolic time living in Texas with your grandparents.
This is when life was so carefree. This is when, number one, I had no bills to pay. I just remember being in the back of my grandfather's 1966 ice Chevy white walled Chevrolet as we are leaving Itasca. I'm sorry, as we're leaving Waco, driving to their parsonage, because my grandfather was a pastor, driving to the parsonage in Itasca. And one of the things that I remember is getting there, and there's just probably why I have a love for antiques, where everything during that time in my life where you could leave the front door open, right? I remember when there was a lady by the name of Mrs. Farver who lived across the street, or Georgia May Norris who lived to the right, or we called her Aunt Pig. That was her. She liked pig feet. Aunt Pig. Where I remember those were the days when someone would come and bring a basket of cornbread, or bring a pot of greens, or bring a brisket of beef, and we would fellowship. Or there was a lot of vacation Bible school. It was just such a warm, friendly, happy time for me as a little girl. And so those were during the summer times when living was easy. And that was why I selected that song by Fantasia.
I want to ask you a question. I ask most of my guests this because it's something that also pertains to me. I'm what is known as a PK, but I'm always in awe of people like you who have this fervent belief in faith and God. I'm questioning it still. Excuse me, I'm questioning it still. But I'm in awe of you because it's been your backbone, if you don't mind me saying.
Yeah. It's been my faith in the power of Almighty God that has sustained me, that has kept my mind, because the things that I walk through, um, I'd say the average person, they probably would have had a nervous breakdown, honestly. I mean, honestly, you probably just would have just cracked, like, I'm out of here. Like, your thinking is just like off kilter, like not even, you don't even know that you're even present, if you will. But I would definitely say that my faith in the word of God, I believe in the word of God in inerrancy from Genesis to Revelation. That has been my anchor. Some people do and some people don't, and that is okay. But that is what has worked for me, because I've seen God work in my mother's life. My mother was a miracle. You know, my mother was a miracle. The fact that she lived another 10 years, and I believe because of the prayers that I prayed, I believe because of words that I spoke over her, I believe they continue to give her life. But I also believe her will. My mother she was a fighter. So yeah,
Did you ever forgive your mother?
I did. We talked about it. We talked about it. And I remember her saying, she said, baby girl, she says, he fooled me too. Yeah, she said, he fooled me too. And she said, I didn't know. But that was, I mean, I was in love with my mother. If you can be in love with a person, like, I was in love with my mother. She was amazing. And we talked about it, and she just said, I'm sorry that you went through that. And she told me, she said, but you have to forgive him for everything that he took you through, because the thing we realized too is that he has an illness. That's an illness. It's an illness. And so I knew in order, to be whole and complete, I had to release it. I had to forgive it, because that would bleed over into every other relationship that I had. And my son looks exactly like my former spouse. But when I looked at my son, I never saw my ex-husband. I just saw my son. I saw his spirit. I saw his heart. His heart is more like mine, tender, soft, and pliable, even though he looked like his father. So I absolutely did forgive my mother. Yes.
onto your final track, and my God, you have made it. Power to you. Why have you chosen Fantasia's I Made It featuring Tye Tribbett?
Because through every trial, through every challenge, through every obstacle, through every closed door, I made it. I'm still here to talk about it, to tell about it. I'm still sane. I'm still healthy. I'm still whole. That was why I chose that song. And um, I think about the lyrics as I've been through the storm and the rain, so much pressure, so much pain. I've been broken into pieces, maybe more. I've made my bed right on the floor. The enemy really tried to take me out, hit me with his best shot, knocked me out. And I mean, through everything, the enemy came after me through people, through circumstances, but yet and still, I still made it.
Final question. If somebody could come along with a magic wand and take you back to a certain period in your life to go and have words of encouragement with your younger self, what time scale would it be and what would you say to yourself?
Hmm. That's a very, very thought provoking question. I would tell my younger self that all things are possible, no matter what it looks like, and that you're going to make it. You're going to be all right.